When it comes to credibility in news, there are few outlets, in fact, only one, that would be higher up on the chain, as far as to the industry experts, than the Washington Post. By the way, that would be the New York Times. The Washington Post is one of America's most respected and proven journalism outlets, despite the current political climate, which has, of course, labeled it to be anything but what it is, which is an outlet that holds power responsible and makes power be truthful. It's the outlet that led to Richard Nixon resigning. Would have led to Richard Nixon being charged for crimes had he not been pardoned, too. And it is also the outlet that contacted NEA Report in the last week because they wanted to work with NEA Report and specifically cover a story that we did. The story in Walnut Ridge of Adam Finley, the railroad worker, who was completely, to use a bit of a pun, railroaded by a Walnut Ridge Police Department officer. But the story didn't end there. The story could have ended there with very little involvement from probably anyone in the media. It didn't end there because when he tried to file a complaint, his life, in the words of Radley Balco, the reporter at the Washington Post, was ruined. We're going to cover that article, what this means for Walnut Ridge now that the nation's second biggest newspaper is covering their problems. And we're going to talk about why now decisions have to be made to fix this that were not and have not been made. That's next on NEA Report, special report. No time soon will any of us here in Northeast Arkansas who have seen the video that we're showing you once again now forget what we're seeing. And it was pretty enraging for most of us. It was a Walnut Ridge police officer at the end of 2016 making a traffic stop, and in his hands right there, which you just saw, holding the identification that said the man worked for Burlington Northern Santa Fe. The officer was pulling him over because he was in an unmarked vehicle and he did not believe he worked for the railroad company.
No, you have an attitude, and what's your problem?
I don't have no problem.
Yes, you do.
I'm good.
I can pull you over if I want.
That's fine.
Because I have a right to...
And the officer escalated the situation from an investigation, which he should have already concluded, to a traffic stop that became physical.
I'm glad you think this is a joke, sir.
I work for him.
What were you doing over there? And why aren't you in a marked vehicle?
Good. Good.
But I didn't see you doing no work over there. And
You
then
want to go back over there and open the door?
You should not put your hands behind your back.
I
Because
ain't
right
doing
now,
nothing.
yeah, you're obstructing with my operation.
No, let me tell you. I work for him. Look at all this stuff back here.
What did I tell you about getting up on me, sir? Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. You're about ignorant.
The officer will begin to cuss the man. He will shove the man so hard at this point that it knocks his own body camera off. And many more things will take place in the video that is 8 minutes long, and it's at NEA Report's YouTube page.
What did I tell you about getting up on me?
I wasn't. I was just trying to tell you something that I could prove that I worked for him.
What did I tell you about getting up on me?
I'm sorry. I didn't.
Now, you want to be a fucking asshole some more?
I'm sorry.
You better shut your fucking mouth. Come here.
Traffic stop would go on, as I mentioned, for a number of minutes. It's very annoying to watch that still again, even for this reporter. The officer would lecture the man on his civil rights. He would tell the man he better not go file a complaint. And to tell the man he was lucky he wasn't arrested, all because the man was surprised at being pulled over by a rather dumb police officer. Like it or not, that's the truth. The truth sometimes hurts, And for some reason, news outlets in Northeast Arkansas, besides NEA reports, sometimes don't go to the level that we do to tell the truth. Let's be frank now. This is a small town, small area. Most people that work here in the news industry are either here in their first or second jobs that are looking to leave, or have to live here, and either way, don't want to make anyone angry.
If you're nervous for what? What did you do? Right. So what are you nervous about? How do you think I feel? I'm out here by myself. I don't know if you've got a gun in there. And then I walk up on you and you jump me all verbally.
Northeast Arkansas, of course, now has NEA report. And we do things a little bit differently. I still try to maintain good relations with everyone in the community. But I'm going to do what's right above all else, because if somebody doesn't respect that, then they are not someone that I want to have good relations with. And that is, of course, a consequence of several things. My experience in reporting, in being at high-level news outlets, at least in this area, since 2007, and in the media before then, and personal experiences too. I'll detail those on our Patreon page someday. It's not part of the story we're talking about today. But police injustice especially bugs me. It really bugs me. This was police injustice, clear as day. There was nothing about this. This traffic stop was perhaps acceptable until he was handed the identification that showed he was a railroad worker. And the officer escalated it completely. The officer worked there for 11 days when he did this. 11! And the only thing that the Walnut Ridge police chief and mayor found wrong was that the man said the, quote, F-bomb. Now, there's a little bit more of a voice that's saying that those officials who found only that to be wrong were overlooking quite a bit. Bradley Balco is an opinion journalist with the Washington Post, the outlet that I mentioned to you at the outset of this broadcast. And Balco has about 80,000 followers on Twitter. He is a very, very respected journalist and somebody that is very well written, too. He contacted NEA Report several days ago. In his research into this story, Balco told the entire story from beginning to end. He also, I don't quite know how to put this without involving myself in the story, not something we generally do, but he was very complimentary of NEA Report and our work in this, and we're grateful for that. I can't express anything other than humility and awe at that being what he said and what he did in this story. I'm going to go through the story now, and I want you all to check this out and read it in full. And think about it, because this is bringing up some excellent points about the reasons this stuff is about more than just a bad apple, and the reasons why police face so much uncertainty and negative feedback from a great deal of the community. And that's not what I'm trying to promote. So I want everyone to know that. I want to promote a relationship between the police department and the community that is friendly and peaceful. But that doesn't just mean the public needs to do better. Right? Common sense. There's a lot of common sense in the article written by Balco. He begins the article. When the body camera footage of an aggressive or abusive police officer goes viral, the response from law enforcement groups is often to caution that we shouldn't judge the entire system based on the actions of a few bad apples. But what's it say when the cops get away with their bad behavior? What about when video footage clearly shows the cops are in the wrong and police chiefs cover for them anyway? What if local prosecutors do too? What if even mayors and city attorneys get into the act? We already know what if in Northeast Arkansas. Those of us who follow this story is not just what if, but it's the story of what happened specifically to Adam Finley. That's what Balco writes. Adam Finley had such an interaction with a bad cop. He was roughed up, sworn at, handcuffed. He tried to file a complaint. He was hit with criminal charges. The local police chief turned Finley's wife against him, which, according to both Finley and her, eventually ended their marriage. The fact that the video of the incident should have vindicated him didn't seem to matter. Finley's trouble first reported by the Jonesboro Sun and then by myself here at NEA Report. It began in December, as we mentioned before, in Walnut Ridge. Now, it's interesting. We're several paragraphs in, and they mentioned the upcoming Beatles at the Ridge Festival. They said it's a small town of about 5,000 in the northeast part of the state. It's charmingly humble claim to fame that the Beatles once changed planes there. And it is a charming claim to fame. It's now completely in the shadow of something not at all charming. Officer Matthew Mercado of the Walnut Ridge Police Department had worked there for 11 days when he pulled Finley over near the railroad yard, it says, although it was actually, I think, near a, well, that's correct. It was near an area where there were some railroads. It was an area, I think, like one of the transformer boxes that Finley was working on. Finley had been in an unmarked vehicle. You saw that in the video I showed you. The reason, by the way, for that is because his work truck, or the regular work truck, was being repaired. So there was an unmarked truck there. Sort of like in Walnut Ridge, there's a vehicle at the city hall that's a city vehicle that does not have license tags on it, which is not legal. But this actually was legal. I'm just pointing that out. Anyway. Officer Matthew Mercado of the Walnut Ridge Police Department pulled Finley over near the railroad yard. Finley hadn't committed any traffic infractions, but Mercado apparently suspected he didn't really work at the railroad. Maybe was trespassing or in some kind of criminal mischief behavior. We showed you the video. That's on the Washington Post article. The video we showed you, our video. Mercado asked Finley to get out of the truck. Now, the microphone, it says, as correctly so, was not on yet during this time. And it's weird that the Walnut Ridge authorities and city, quote, leadership is leaning on that as what has held them back from making a judgment. And I want you to read exactly what the reporter from the Post says in this. It says, Mercado didn't turn the audio on until 30 seconds into the stop. During that time, the video shows Finley handing Mercado both his license and employee ID from the railroad company. Mercado then asks Finley to get out of the truck. It's here that Mercado then turns on his mic. He asks Finley, what's with the attitude? Finley, who appears to have done nothing to indicate a, quote, attitude, replies, nothing. Mercado persists, no, you have an attitude. What's your problem? Persists, keyword. Finley responds, I don't have no problem. I'm good. But Mercado keeps pushing. I can pull you over if I want. Finley says, that's fine. Later, Mercado, this is the words of the Washington Post reporter. Later, Mercado again expresses doubt about Finley's employment. Again, despite having Finley's employee ID in his own hands. Quote, it doesn't look like you were working, he says. As he says this, Finley takes a small step away from the truck. Mercado snaps, if you get up on me again, we're going to have problems. Finley, clearly taken aback, flashes a nervous smile. Mercado again ratchets up the tension. I'm glad you think all this is a joke, sir. Finley shakes his head and again tells Mercado he works for the railroad. Mercado again indicates he doesn't believe him. Finley is then ordered to put his hands behind his back. As Mercado says he's going to arrest him for obstructing my operation, Finley, clearly nervous, protests and tried to prove Mercado wrong by showing him that I worked there. He was reaching into the vehicle to show him some work stuff, right? His work jacket probably, tools. At this point, it turns violent. Mercado grabs Finley, throws him against the truck. Finley puts his hands behind his back. Mercado cuffs him and says, you're about ignorant, and then again shoves Finley into the truck, this time with enough force to dislodge his own body camera, which falls to the ground. That dislodging was something City Attorney Nancy Hall told me in text messages was Finley shoulder blocking, running his shoulder into the officer hard enough to knock the body camera off. That's her words. The next several minutes, Mercado uses profanity. The Washington Post doesn't use the words that Mercado did use. You heard those words a moment ago. He claims Finley is hostile and aggressive. Throughout all of this, Finley remarkably calm and insists over and over he works for the railroad. He doesn't understand why he was pulled over, because there was no good reason. And there was certainly no good reason for this to continue on and on and on. 11 days into this officer being hired. Mercado ultimately released Finley without arresting him, probably because he realized Finley really did work for the railroad and did nothing wrong. But the Post writes, before he does, he issued multiple threats and allegations, telling Finley, the next time I tell you something, you're going to ride lightning, referring to a stun gun. He later warns, don't later on try to complain that I roughed you up or anything like that, because you know I should take your ass to jail, unquote. He also falsely accuses Finley of, quote, assaulting a peace officer, unquote. For good measure, just before walking away, Mercado asks, quote, did we learn anything today, Adam? Finley responds, yeah, I learned a lot. And we all have since that moment took place in December of 2016. The Post writes, the lessons would keep coming. Finley and his wife later went to the Walnut Ridge Police Department to file a complaint. But instead of taking the complaint, Police Chief Chris Kirksey and Sergeant Matt Cook interrogated and scolded Finley. Under orders from Kirksey, Cook wrote Finley 2 citations for refusal to submit and obstructing governmental operations. I would not have. I would have refused that order, but that's me. Note that Mercado didn't feel compelled to cite Finley. It was only after Finley attempted to file a complaint about Mercado's behavior that Mercado's supervisor hit him with 2 misdemeanors. Note, the Walnut Ridge Police Department declined to comment, citing Finley's lawsuit. Yeah, I'm sure that's the reason you're not commenting. The Walnut Ridge Police Department officer, it says, relayed Balco's request for comment to Kirksey, who declined to comment as well. At one point during the interaction, Finley left the room, leaving Kirksey alone with Finley's wife, Heather. At one point after Adam Finley left, Kirksey said, quote, from what I saw, he's lucky he isn't going to jail. Heather responds, who, Adam? For what? Kirksey says obstruction of justice. What did he do? He interfered with a law enforcement officer's investigation. How did he do that? Well, when you watch the video, you'll find out. That's what Kirksey said. The video shows nothing like that. Now, you and I know that because we just watched it, and we have brains. Kirksey knew that too. And you know why he knew that and why I know that? Because he called me up there and begged me not to release this video. More on that here in a moment, because that's in the Washington Post story too. The video, Heather did not get to see that day. I don't think she saw it until this year. And I'm almost certain it was around the time we reported it. It may have been our report. The video, as the Post writes, quote, shows nothing of the kind. But authority figures can be incredibly persuasive, and there are few positions that project more authority than a chief of police. Perhaps that's how Kirksey managed to turn Finley's own wife against him. She said to Kirksey, well, there's probably more to it than I don't know what he did. He gets a little, and Kirksey says, does he get irate? And she goes, mm-hmm. Because she's not going to argue with the police chief. She hasn't seen the video. It's her husband's word against the police chief. And before anybody blames her, please don't. Please do not. Because while this was most definitely a factor for both of them, you can't blame victims. And everybody that was involved in this on the Finley side was a victim, including his now ex-wife, Heather. The police chief sowed the seeds of doubt. I'm sure they had their problems like any marriage, but I think that was definitely the main thing that did it, said Mark Reese, who's, of course, representing Adam Finley. And both Adam and Heather told me that ruined their marriage. was a big factor. They both told me it was the single biggest factor. They didn't deny that there were probably other things, other problems, just like everyone has. But put yourself in this position for a moment. Your significant other may have been with them for a year or two, something like that. You know them pretty good, but we don't know everything about the person we're with, even if we've been with them forever. So you're told by your sig other that they were completely done wrong. It was an injustice, and you describe the incident just as we've seen. If you hadn't seen any of this with your own eyes, would you really believe the officer started a fight, shoved him against the truck, cussed him out, threw him against the truck, then lectured him about his rights, threatened to stun gun him, then he got citations for complaining about the officer, then they got prosecuted? Would you believe any of this if we didn't have the video? Many of you might. Most of you probably wouldn't. That's a reality. Most people in Northeast Arkansas tend to sway toward defending the police. A great many are neutral and want to know the truth. And when you don't have definitive proof, folks tend to side with the police. And maybe this is why that should be reconsidered as well, right? But I bring that up because I want you to understand. That was the perception. Either one person's lying in Heather's mind, or this entire department and city is lying. It was actually the latter. And we know that now. But who in the world would believe that without proof? Not even me. Finley's case went to the office of, it says, 3rd Judicial District Prosecuting Attorney Henry Boyce. He assigned it to Deputy Prosecutor Ryan Cooper. It actually worked a little bit differently than that. It was actually something that Ryan Cooper is contracted through the City Council of Walnut Ridge to do. But he performs those duties while also being the deputy prosecutor for the district. So that's why he handled misdemeanors instead of felonies. But bizarrely enough, Henry Boyce owned this and issued a statement saying he supported it. So, it's all the same. He took the case all the way to trial, despite the video, moved forward with charges against Finley. And in April 2017, an Arkansas judge acquitted Finley on both counts. Finley filed a civil rights lawsuit in April this year. And the city answered in May with a brief argument that Finley hadn't made an actionable claim and missed the statute of limitations and failed to sufficiently serve the officials he's suing. It says when the lawsuit, goes on to say, try to get this Dodge ad out of the way. When the lawsuit went public, local media outlets did open record requests for video of the traffic stop, records related to it, and whatnot. It says, myself, Morris, a former newspaper reporter who runs what is essentially a one-man operation, NEA stands for Northeast Arkansas, had been particularly dogged in his pursuing of the story, filing multiple open record requests, pouring through the results on his web-based program, that would be this, and then asking Walnut Ridge officials to answer what he had found. And then this is when it describes what happened. When the police chief, after this traffic stop, had called me in to the office and pleaded with me not to publish anything about this, not to publish the video specifically, to have their backs and whatnot. And I couldn't do that. But I didn't understand what they were asking because I didn't know what the video was. At the time, I was told that Mercado used the F word, shouldn't have used the F word, but the problem was that the railroad worker was aggressive and started and escalated the fight. That's what I was told. That's what the police chiefs said about this. So his no comment stuff, here's what he actually said to the reporter, me. He said that it was justified. The F word was the only thing wrong. And I figured out why that weird meeting took place where I was called to Walnut Ridge and it was supposed to all be kept secret. I figured it out after I realized it was an attempt at deception and one I would not be a part of. I also knew that I had burned the bridge completely with those folks who attempted to get me to cover for them by just not doing it. So there was no point in me not telling you the complete truth about what happened. The only time I will ever reveal something that I promised someone I will keep secret is if it's a deception to me and a crime. Both of those cases, this was a crime by the police and by the officer. And they wanted me to cover for that crime, and I won't do it. And that's why that I spoke about that. The quote that the Post published, it definitely helped me to understand what the meeting was about. I said, that's weird to have to say, I think they knew that this would be a huge problem for them, and they tried to mislead me. I sent another open records request, and this details the part when the city attorney, Nancy Hall, texted me some unrequested information. Stuff about him supposedly being the subject of a protective order from his first wife. She was trying to make him look violent. I asked her what this had to do with the stuff, because it had nothing to do with this case. And, well, of course, we managed to get her to stop talking about that stuff so much then. It seemed like she realized I wasn't falling for it. When I talked to Finley, by the way, about all this stuff, he made a persuasive case that it was a misunderstanding. Officer Matthew Mercado's report, the official report he filed with the city, had a number of differences, let's just be frank, lies in it compared to what the truth was, what we saw in the video. It stated, for instance, that Finley wouldn't hand over his driver's license when he asked for it. Instead, he just waved it in front of me. The video does not show that at all. Mercado claimed Finley at one point said, "This is the stupidest shit ever." This was never depicted in the audio ever, and you cannot see him saying that at any point ever, even before it started recording, which he didn't have his camera on, so, why would he supposedly be acting that way if the officer had not turned his camera on yet? Wouldn't the officer turn the camera on the second he realized he needed to record this guy? Nah, probably not. Mercado claimed that Finley made an aggressive step toward him. The video did not show that. You did not see that. That never happened. Mercado claimed that once he restrained Finley, he continued to look for evidence that Finley was an employee of the railroad company. He had Finley's ID card within seconds before Finley got out of the vehicle, before Mercado asked him to get out of the vehicle. Mercado claimed that Finley drove his shoulder into him, which dislodged his body camera. Remember, that's what Nancy Hall said to me, because she never watched the video until we released it. She just claimed she did. But she did read his report and took that as the truth. At least, that's what it seems like to me. Mercado claimed that Finley drove his shoulder into him, which dislodged his body camera. Sorry, I just had to read that complete false statement once more. The video seemed to show that Mercado was the aggressor. The video did show that, and the camera came loose when he threw Finley into the side of the truck. But, as the Post reports, despite all of this, the city continued to defend the stop, the criminal charges, both publicly and privately. Their main claim, Finley was aggressive and combative before Mercado activated his microphone, and that escalated the situation. It's weird. It's like officers act like, or it's like these city officials, acted like that this officer, or perhaps like other officers, are these frail, emotionally frail people, do not do anything to trigger us. And if you do anything, then everything the officer does is justified. That is not a logical argument. You know it, I know it. And I can't understand how the city officials in Walnut Ridge don't know it, but there are several reasons to be skeptical of the claim about Finley being aggressive and combative, it says, according to the Post. The first, only about 30 seconds transpire before Mercado activates his mic. The second, the silent footage of that 30 seconds didn't suggest Finley was angry or uncooperative. The third, it seems odd that Finley would be aggressive and rude for the first half minute of the stop, then immediately become cooperative the moment Mercado turned on his mic. Right? That's logic. It also isn't clear that he would have known when the mic was on or off, because you can't tell what the officer's doing with all the stuff he's got, and the radios and the buttons and the gadgets. Finally, there should have been a dashboard camera footage recording the incident, including the first 30 seconds. There wasn't. Walnut Ridge Mayor Charles Knapp initially claimed there was no dashboard camera in Mercado's car, but when photos indicated that there obviously was, the city then claimed they could not access the footage because the dash camera software had changed. Aw, shucks. You know what that looks like, Charles? I'm just going to be frank with you, my friend, because you don't answer my texts anymore since I've reported on this. That makes it look like, in the Washington Post, that you're a liar. I don't think you necessarily are, but I'm reserving my personal judgment on that. What I'm telling you is what it makes you look like. When you claim there's nothing in the car, and there is, and then you claim, well, it doesn't work. Well, no, we can't prove you wrong. You're right. It just looks really bad to those of us with common sense. It also looks really bad that all you did was issue a verbal warning to Mercado for using the F-bomb, as you put it, during the stop. The rest of Mercado's actions didn't merit discipline. That's what the Post says. In April, Boyce, the head prosecutor, put out a press release which blew our minds in the media, because he didn't have to do that, but he did. Boyce pointed out under Arkansas law, it is illegal to resist an arrest even if there was no legal jurisdiction for the arrest. That is so pathetic. As that may be true, it's also true that a prosecutor has the discretion to decline to bring charges if doing so wouldn't be in the interest of justice. Resisting an illegal arrest would seem to be the sort of scenario for which it might be appropriate to use that kind of discretion. That's what the Washington Post wrote. You know, maybe if the arrestee wasn't even resisting arrest, like the video shows. Boyce declared in his press statement, quote, I have reviewed video that led to the citations and feel the evidence justified the recommendation Mr. Cooper made to the chief of police. Hall, the city attorney, also said the city's legal team would make quick work of the case and said it's sad that this happened and we have such good, hardworking personnel within our department. Remember also how she called this a nuisance lawsuit? I wonder if Washington Post level coverage is a nuisance. The story goes on to, honestly, flatter this reporter, and I'm grateful for Mr. Balco doing this. He says that I kept digging and discovered that 2 years before the incident with Finley, Mercado had been arrested for battery, although he was acquitted. Moreover, before he was hired with the Walnut Ridge Police Department, he left 2 different police agencies in Colorado in a span of less than 3 months. He'd been on the job in Walnut Ridge for 11 days when that traffic stop happened. He resigned just a short time after this, and his resignation had nothing publicly stated to do with this case. Nothing was in that resignation. In fact, he worked longer after this happened than he had before, leading up to the traffic stop. He also asked to be reconsidered for a job in law enforcement, and Kirksey responded with an email praising his service to the department. Cops can do no wrong, right? When video of the stop was made public, the reaction was what we know it was. It was a reasonable reaction. People were sick of it. And as I've mentioned before, because I don't want police overall to get a bad rap, when right now we should be focusing on what one handful of officers and city leaders did, right? That's the focus. A lot of police have hated this and told me that they have. But overall, this does highlight a problem in policing in general that we should address, and we are going to in a moment. First up, when the video was made public, the reaction was what we know. It was outrage. The Jonesboro Sun managing editor sharply criticized the city leaders in an opinion piece. The police department said it was shutting down its Facebook page. They had to recently disable reviews on the City of Walnut Ridge's page because it's at about 1 star right now. Perhaps seeing the public pressure building, The article says that the city placed Kirksey and Cook on administrative leave. That's 16 months after their alleged infractions. And they cited the reason was for their public safety. That was what the Walnut Ridge city leaders said in emails that I obtained. Then Kirksey resigned last month. But once again, there was no public indication that his resignation had anything to do with how he handled the Finley complaint. Cook's back on the job. Boyce and Cooper also still on the job. There's an argument to be made. It says that the officers who treated Finley the worst have since resigned and have been held accountable. But the Post writes, but for accountability to work, for it to serve as a deterrent to bad police behavior, or just to bad behavior, there should be clear articulated connections between the behavior and the punishment. Here, the reason for both resignations remains ambiguous. It's tempting to blow all of this off as a single insignificant incident in a small town, Balco writes. But it isn't Los Angeles Rampart or Chicago's systemized torture, but it also isn't unique. There's a steady stream of stories like this when he writes. In fact, Balco says he found out about this story because of a police officer who advocates for criminal justice reform. That officer sent to Balco this, and this is what we have looked for to talk to you about for a while now. And that officer left his name out of this for reasons you'll understand soon, if you don't already. Quote, "This is very common in policing. Looking back on my career, I realized how often I acted similarly and didn't even realize it. It was subconscious. I was trained and subtly incentivized to do so. You intentionally create conflict and manufacture non-compliance in order to build your stop into an arrest situation, because that's what generations of law enforcers who have been steeped in fear, a fear-based comply or else us versus them mindset do. They arrest people. Arrests are a primary measure of productivity and give the appearance your department has solved the problem or a problem. Most aggressive cops have honed this to an art. They are savvy, know exactly how to weaponize numerous petty laws, ordinances, use of force policy, and procedure against citizens. This cop was off his game and clumsily went through the motions like a desperate door-to-door perfume salesman, except when cops manufacture a, quote, sale like this, the, quote, customer ends up arrested, criminalized, emotionally, and financially devastated, not to mention possibly physically beaten or worse. And the justice system will deem it legal even when it wasn't. And as far as the police leadership and prosecutors, they knew exactly what they were doing. If someone makes a complaint, you find something, anything, to charge them with. That is one of the most perfectly stated explanations for the problem we are trying to highlight here that I've ever been able to find. And even the Washington Post couldn't get this guy to put his name on the record. So do you understand why it's hard for us to do sometimes, and maybe for others, to get sources to go on the record? That's why we have opened the door of doing anonymous source reporting, but only because I have built up a level of trust with this audience, you that tune into this show and our broadcast and our coverage every day for years, for you to know that I'm competent enough to gauge who I am talking to as being someone that's credible, that makes sense. Finley wasn't shot or choked to death or found hanging in a jail cell, because those things have happened, and they've been dealt with similarly. Not this time. No. He didn't suffer any permanent or lasting physical injury. Mercado didn't use racist or bigoted language, but Finley did everything he was supposed to, the Post writes. From the footage we see and hear, he was polite, provided ID when it was asked of him, and stepped out of the truck when ordered. Despite cooperating, he was treated poorly, detained, and roughed up. When he tried to file a complaint, he was harassed, and the chief of police attempted to turn his own wife against him by citing video she hadn't seen that actually vindicated her husband. But even after seeing that video, city officials prosecuted this guy. Even after the video was released, city officials maligned Finley in the press and insisted that the residents of Walnut Ridge believe the assertions of authority figures over video evidence that contradicted them. The Washington Post writes, "The lesson Finley learned here is pretty clear. Power usually wins. You can be as cooperative as possible. But if a police officer wants to dish out some abuse, he can. And he probably will get away with it. Try to hold him accountable if you like, but doing that may come with a heavy price. Other public officials cover up for bad apple cops. The story is no longer about the bad apples. It's about the systemic failure. It's about public servants willing to tolerate abuse because they're more loyal to one another than to the public they serve," Balco writes. He also goes on to bring up the point, it's difficult to say how someone in a position of authority, someone with public trust, could view footage of that encounter and say that they believe criminal charges were justified. He says perhaps they were just lying. Look at that. Or maybe they were so blinded by the deference to the law enforcement fear of accountability or a knee-jerk reaction, defense of authority, that they maybe believed what they were saying. That's what he wrote. He says, "I'm not sure which of those scenarios should worry us more." But there was a lesson to learn out of this. Balco's story was published this morning. Since this morning, just the story itself has received 1,000 comments. And it's been shared quite a few times as well on social media. But the Washington Post coverage is not necessarily about getting more views. This has already received millions of views. What this is now is your most credible, respected journalists in America showing and telling you precisely why this had to be covered and precisely what the problem was. This is a police officer explaining the systemic failure and why that bad cops can get by with behavior by covering up for each other, and why that they do a lot. I've had it happen to me. I know. Why do you think I went after this case as hard as I did? This kind of stuff will never stop until we in the media, we in the public, everyone stands up and says, no, this will not happen. We will not allow this. And those who facilitate it are voted out immediately. Mercado is not an officer in Walnut Ridge. He did not leave on bad terms, and he can put it on his resume again, including his recommendation letter from the chief of police. The chief of police did not leave on bad terms. He can be a law enforcement officer somewhere else and put it on his resume that he resigned. City Attorney Nancy Hall keeps her job as of today. Deputy Prosecutor Ryan Cooper has his job as of today. Walnut Ridge Mayor Charles Snap has his job as of today. And as they're preparing to promote the Beatles at the Ridge, you're going to get to see a lot of shares and a lot of coverage of the Beatles. They're going to be sharing a lot of stuff about that. I've seen the Walnut Ridge Mayor send tons of news out before. Anytime a big outlet talked about the Walnut Ridge town and the Beatles connection, my guess is he won't be sharing this article. And it's the biggest outlet ever that's going to cover it, the Beatles and Walnut Ridge. But just not for the reasons they had hoped. Today's program is brought to you by our Patreon page. We're doing a special report once we hit 10 backers, and that's not very far away. In fact, we've just got about 6 spots to go. Okay, we have, I just threw this on the end of yesterday's program, and it turned out a bunch of people were getting on and checking it out. We're going to do a special report for Patreon backers only. They'll be able to find out all of what it's like to work in local media at the different places and what it's like to work with certain folks, many of which are incredible and awesome, and I have amazing stories to tell, like the time Diana Davis brought me a huge just platter of food when I had a terrible surgery. That was an incredible moment. There's no platform to share that on, right? NEA Report's for news, but this is a way for you to support NEA Report, at the same time find out a little bit of extra stuff. Some of the stories may not always be so positive, but nonetheless we think you'll find them enjoyable. Today's program, as mentioned, brought to you by that, and by our sponsors here on NEA Report.
Haley Norris, Realtor.
No.
Should I make my hair go like this? Whether you need to buy, sell, or lease. Haley, can I use my hands? Or is
Yeah.
that, where are my hands? Where do they go?
Just say-
Haley.
Just like Haley.
Whether you need my expertise. Haley Norris, Realtor. Or even do a commercial lease. Haley Norris, Realtor. Should I say Remax Real Estate Center or no? Is that too salesy?
No, that's good.
My average days on market is just 50 days. You need my expertise. And that means I'm putting more money back in your pocket.
Family Medical Clinic of Walnut Ridge and Bono are your neighborhood healthcare providers, and we're now accepting new patients. We know you have a tight schedule, so we're here 6 days a week at both locations from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Walk-ins are welcome. In Walnut Ridge, stop by 1045 West Main Street or call us to make an appointment, 886-8300. In Bono, we're on Highway 63 North or call 930-9990. Walnut Ridge Family Medical Clinic and Bono Family Medical Clinic, here for you when you need us.
Before we finish up what we're doing here today on NEA Report, I would like to show you guys what the forecast looks like. We have slight chances for showers in the forecast for pretty much every day, about 20%, maybe 30% Saturday and Sunday. This evening and really until 8 p.m., we're under a heat advisory, heat index like 105 or so in Jonesboro right now. So if you're outside, be safe, please. Hydrated, know what all the signs for heat-related illness and such are. For your forecast in the next couple of days, it's going to be cooler tomorrow, 94 Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and mostly sunshine out there except for occasional pop-up showers. It's 94 degrees at the Jonesboro Municipal Airport as of last check. And now you're up to date on NEA Report. Thank you all so very much for tuning in and for supporting this project that most definitely is not something I ever expected to see covered in the Washington Post, but again, with your support and with us deciding to do the right thing, anything is possible. I'm Stan Morris, and you're up to date.